Yes.
Yes, great. So yes, let's jump right to it. Can we know for sure if Joe Biden will be declared the winner tonight?
No, we cannot be sure because even though right now we're focused on those two states that I mentioned in my report, Pennsylvania and Georgia, where Joe Biden has a pretty comfortable lead in Pennsylvania with 17,000 more votes than Joe Biden has 17,000 more votes than President Trump. And in Georgia, he has a much slimmer lead, which is about 4,000 votes. And that's going to mean a recount in that state of Georgia, as well as a recount in the state of Wisconsin. So if one of those states, either Georgia or Pennsylvania, gets called tonight, especially if we get Pennsylvania called tonight, then we'll know that Joe Biden will exceed that magic number of 270 electoral votes. I'm sure that your viewers know that elections in the U.S. are not decided by the popular vote, but by the number of electoral votes that each candidate wins. So if we get past that 270 magic number, the election may be called for Joe Biden, and at that point, Joe Biden is ready to make some sort of statement. He's getting ready right now at Wilmington, Delaware, his hometown. We're told around about 8 p.m. he'll be making a statement if the race is called to him. But no, there's absolutely no way to know for sure whether or not the vote count in Pennsylvania and Georgia will be finished by tonight. It's projected to be finished by tonight, but you never know. There could be some issues like, for example, in Georgia, about 2 days ago, there was a busted pipe that delayed counting. So at this point, I really just feel very uncomfortable about projecting any kind of definitive answer.
Okay, Ms. Patsy, what has been the reaction from the President Donald Trump so far?
It's really interesting. I've been at the White House, and around about 6:30 this evening, about half an hour ago, the White House called a lid. So what does a lid mean? It means essentially a promise from the White House that no more news will come out, which means the president will not be addressing the American people like he did yesterday around about the same time at 6:30. So there's been no reaction from President Trump himself in person. However, we do see a lot of his tweets. We do also see statements from the Trump campaign, essentially repeating the same thing that the president has been saying since yesterday, which is that Democrats are stealing this election. He's alluding to this larger conspiracy of the media being against him, pollsters being against him, election officials being against him. And I have to stress that there's absolutely no claim, no basis for all of these claims. There's no evidence of any kind of a fraud in any kind of massive scale. There may be irregularities here and there, but certainly not to the level that the president is accusing.
Okay, and according to that, can this be taken all the way to the Supreme Court?
I'm sorry, I can't hear you because right now what I'm hearing is programming from the report. What was it that your question was?
Can this be taken all the way to the Supreme Court?
Yes, I mean, in fact, that is the hope from the Trump campaign, which is, essentially trying to launch all these series of lawsuits in these key battleground states of Nevada, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, in the hopes that one or more of them will reach the Supreme Court. So the Supreme Court consists of 9 justices. 6 of them are justices appointed by Republican presidents, including 3 appointed by President Trump, including one that was just appointed in last September. So the hope from President Trump is that this court, this body that decides the last letter of the law in the United States, will be more sympathetic to him in terms of how they will rule on these court cases. Whether or not that is true, we'll have to see what happens, but certainly there is this concern from Democrats in particular that the court will be much more sympathetic to the president because of the fact of the ideological makeup of the justices, 6 conservatives and 3 liberal judges.
I see, Patsy. Now, can you talk to us about kind of the supporters of Biden and Trump? Has there been any kind of protests or any kind of violence on the streets there in the United States?
Yeah, I mean, there's been dueling protests on certain areas, for example, in Philadelphia, in New York, in Detroit, usually around these areas where they count the votes, right? I mean, one side says, stop the vote, stop the count, and then the other side says the opposite thing. There hasn't been any kind of real clashes, any kind of real street violence, but there is a concern. And the reason why I say that is because President Trump has been signaling to his supporters for weeks not to accept the results of the election unless he is declared the winner because the election is rigged. Now, add to this heightened tension in the American people who are very anxious in terms of waiting for the result, add to the fact that guns are legal in the U.S. and gun sales have increased in the U.S. And therefore, there's all these weight of election, post-election, not only litigation, but also friction and perhaps violence.
Yes, you said before about the gun sales has increased. Why did that happen?
Yeah, so this is an interesting trend that we've been observing, that gun sales in the U.S. has increased during the pandemic, and especially so after the racial justice protest movement that was born after the killing of George Floyd under police custody. You remember, this is a black man who was killed after a white policeman put a knee on his neck for many minutes, and he lost his life then. So all these racial justice movement, all these violence on the street, whether it's riots or looting, it's making Americans nervous, and they are buying guns in large numbers. I mean, in fact, right now I hear that there's actually a waiting list if you want to buy guns. Ammunition is low stock, so there's definitely an increase in gun sales, and it is quite a trend that's normal if you observe American politics. Ahead of the election, more people buy guns for whatever reason, but this is a remarkably definite increase in 2020.
So, Patsy, since the world are waiting for the results of U.S. election, so many things are going during this election. When can we know for sure who is the president?
That is a really interesting answer. And to be honest, at this point, nobody knows, okay? Because there's all these litigation that's going to go perhaps all the way up to the Supreme Court. There's all these recounts in Wisconsin as well as in Georgia. Who knows what the president might do in terms of lawsuits. And, both campaigns are just really careful. But we have to remember that there is a date. There is a cutoff date, which is called the safe harbor deadline, and that is December 8th. At that point, all post-election litigation must be resolved so that the electors can formally cast their vote to choose who will be the next president and vice president of the United States by December 14th. So it may be a while, it may be a few weeks, and it may be a rocky few weeks. Nobody knows.
Okay.
I see, Patsy. Now, I know the whole focus has been a lot, like you said, we don't know when the president election or the result will come out. But can you briefly talk about kind of what's going on in the U.S. Senate and the U.S. House of Representatives race? Do we see it'll be controlled by Democrats or Republicans?
That's still a toss-up, right? I mean, there's this idea that Democrats are just going to sweep the Senate. And the reason why that's important is if you have a President Biden, he is not going to be able to exercise, and he's not going to be able to implement any of his legislative agenda if the Senate is controlled by Republicans. So Democrats are really hoping to take control of the Senate. In fact, they were projecting, 51, 52, 53 out of the 100 Senate seats to be grabbed by Democrats. At this point, it's still unknown. It's also 48-48. And so one of the major states where the election is happening in terms of Senate seat is also Georgia. It may come off to a runoff election. So we won't actually know until January if that runoff election happens. So things are happening. A lot of things are in the balance right now, not just for the presidency, but also for the Senate seats.
Okay. I'm really curious, how's the reaction of Indonesian in America with Biden projected to win?
So it really depends on which Indonesians you're talking about. Now, I cannot say definitively based on scientific data because there has been no polling of Indonesians asking them how many of you are Democrats or how many of you are Republicans. I can only say anecdotally that it really depends on where those Indonesians live, whether or not, maybe they're evangelical Christians who usually vote conservative, who usually support Republican candidates, or whether they live in big cities who are usually more liberal and tend to vote Democrats. So this area, Washington, D.C. in general, 96%, I believe, of the vote, 96, 93%, something like that, above 90% of the vote went to Joe Biden. So this is a very liberal city. And so most Indonesians who live in this area, in the Washington, D.C. area, Virginia, as well as Maryland, is quite liberal overall, anecdotally. Again, this is not speaking based on scientific data. But if you're talking about Indonesians who live in Texas, perhaps who live in, in Oklahoma or areas in the South, North Carolina, they may be trending the same way that the rest of the population of that state is. And again, depending on whether they go to church, how old they are, based on their demographics.
I see, Patsy. Well, thank you for joining us this morning on the CE Morning Show.
My pleasure.
We learned a lot from you about Biden maybe giving a speech from Delaware, that Congress is still a toss-up, as well as it could be a rocky ride to the Supreme Court in terms of who becomes the next president of the United States. So we look forward to more updates from you and the VOA team. Thank you.